So I don't think I'm going to sing for you tonight. I think that we're going to probably try and push this next book all the way through so I can put it in the bag so it can be donated tomorrow. So I'm going to probably have to take a pause if the dryer goes off so I can put the laundry from the washer to the dryer in there and full. Excuse me, my carbonated water's getting to me. And put the stuff that's in the dryer away. So let's start. Make Mine a Bad Boy. Acknowledgements from Katie Lane. Like my character Hope Scroggs, I am blessed with people who believe in me, and I can't thank them enough for all their love and support. My loving husband Jamie, my beautiful daughters Aubrey and Tiffany, their wonderful men John Sudbury and Donnie Severi, and my precious granddaughters Gabby and Sienna. You are my heart, and I am so proud of each and every one of you. My mother-in-law Kay Smith for all her encouragement over the years. My L sisters Lori Tillery for dropping everything when I needed help. Lou Lumbus for always being the voice of reason. Linda Chambers for all the giggly dinners. Speaking of giggles, my favorite night of the month is always book club night when I get to flop down on the couch and drink wine and munch on the snacks while they discussing the books with the dog-eared divas. Within there are the lovely ladies of the Lyra Land of enchantment romance authors, the best romance writers of America chapter in the world. It is an honor to be a part of the group of such talented writers. Go Team Romance. And thanks to all of my Define Gym rats. If I ever need an expert, I can always find one there. Thanks, Jeff Favre, for all your custom bike experience. I hope your custom bike kicks butt in Sturgis. But last but not least, a special thanks to the agent Laura Bradford for all of her business savvy with the great title, and Alex Logan, my editor, for all of her hard work. I'm so lucky to have such a great team. And I'm also going to read the back cover again, just to give you a reminder of who Katie Lane is. Katie Lane is a firm believer that love conquers all, and laughter is the best medicine, which is why you'll find plenty of humor and happily ever afters in her contemporary and Western contemporary romance novels. A USA Today best-selling author, she has written numerous series, including Deep in the Heart of Texas, Hunk for the Holidays, Overnight Billionaires, Tender Heart Texas, The Brides of Bliss Texas, and The Bad Boy Ranch. Katie lives in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and when she's not writing, she enjoys reading, eating chocolate, dark, please. Me too, Katie. We have that in common. And snuggling with her high school sweetheart and her cane terrier, Raru. So let's start with chapter 1. And like I said, we're just going to see how far we get through. Probably take a time out so I can finish the book and get the laundry going in the right direction, put away, and, get the others to the dryer and go from there. So this is now Make Mine a Bad Boy. It was a dream. It had to be. Where else in a dream could you be an observer at your own wedding? A silent spectator who watched as you stood in front of a church filled with rafters with all your family and friends and whispered your vows to a handsome cowboy you loved most of your life, a cowboy who kissed you as if his life depended on it, before he hurried down the aisle and off to the reception where he fed you champagne from his glass and cake from his fingers before taking you in his strong arms and waltzing you toward happily ever after. It was a dream. Her dream. Hog, you gonna eat that piece of cake? And just like that, her dream was shattered into a nightmare. Hope Marie Scroggins pulled away her gaze from the dance floor and looked over at Kenny Jean, who was staring down at the half-eaten slice of wedding cake on her plate. "'Cause if you ain't," he said, "I sure hate to see it go to waste." Without waiting for an answer, he speared the cake and crammed a forkful into his mouth, continuing to talk between chews. "That Josephine sure outdid herself this time. Who would have thought that raspberry jam would go good with that yeller cake?" And the fork came back toward the plate, but before he could snap another piece, his girlfriend Twyla slapped his hand and the plastic fork sailed through the air, bounced off one of those ceramic pig centerpieces, and disappeared beneath the table. "Kenny Jean, don't you be eating Hope's food. She needs all them nutrients." Hope didn't have a clue what Twyla was talking about, and she didn't care. All she wanted to do was recapture her dream, but it was too late. Too late to ignore the fact that she wasn't the one who whirled around the dance floor in the arms of Slate Calhoun, the handsomest cowboy in West Texas. But she should have been. It should have been Hope dressed in her mama's 3-tiered lace wedding dress, Hope who sipped his clear plastic solo cup, Hope who licked Josephine's raspberry jamboree cake from those strong quarterback fingertips. It should have been in her arms, looped over that lean cowboy frame, and her face tucked underneath that sexy black Stetson, awaiting a kiss from those sweet, smiling lips. Her. Certainly not some damn Yankee who come down to Bramble, Texas, looking for her long-lost twin sister, only to steal that same sister's identity like a peach pie out to cool. It wasn't fair, and it wasn't right, not when Hope was the only one who had done all the prep work, the one who had suffered through all the cheerleading practices and homecoming parades and hog-calling contests, all to make her family and the townfolk proud. And then some city-fied wimp with ugly hair showed up, and their loyalty switched like Buford Floyd's gender, and she was expected to grin and bear it, to pretend that everything was just fine and dandy, to act like she didn't give a hoot, that her life had just been spit out like a stream of tobacco juice at the sidewalk. Her anger burned from the injustice of it all, and all she wanted to do was drop to the ground, throw a fit like she was a child, and if she'd thought it would work, she would have. But it was too late for that. The vows had been spoken, the marriage license had been signed. Besides, she was Hope Marie Scroggs, the most popular girl in West Texas, and she wasn't about to let anyone know how devastated she was that her dreams of the wedding day were being lived out by someone else. Someone who, at the moment, looked over at her and smiled a bright, cheerful smile with white, even teeth and that reflected the lights shooting off the huge disco ball hanging from the ceiling. How could some sugary sweet Disney princess have lived in the same womb with her for 9 months? It made absolutely no sense whatsoever, nor could Hope figure out why she smiled back, though it might have been more than just a baring of teeth, because Faith's smile fizzled before Slate whirled her away. "Your fangs are showing, honey." Her best friend Shirlene slipped into the folding chair next to her with a soft rustle of gold satin. Since her daydream was already stomped to the smithereens, Hope turned to Shirlene and lifted a brow at the mounds of flesh swelling over the top of her bridesmaid's dress. "And better than having my boobs showing," Hope retorted. Shirlene didn't even attempt to tug up the strapless confection that put Hope's grotesque purple maid of honor's dress to shame. "Admit it, you've always been kind of jealous of the girls." Shirlene flashed a bright smile at Kenny and Twyla as they got up and headed for the dance floor. "The girls?" Hope's eyes widened. "Those ain't girls, Shirl. The broads, maybe, but not girls." Shirlene laughed. "Okay, so you always been jealous of the broads." Hope shrugged. "If you had my teacups, you'd be jealous, too." "I don't know about that. I get pretty tired of lugging these suckers around. I'm sure Lyle doesn't mind helping out with that." She glanced around for Shirlene's husband. "Where is Lyle, anyway?" "He's meeting in the morning, so he's got to get up to bed early." "A meeting on Sunday?" For just a brief second, Shirlene's pretty green eyes turned before she could look away to fiddle with the purple ribbon tied around that fat ceramic pig, one of the same pigs that had been pulled off for every town celebration since they were made for Hope's 15th birthday. That's the problem with marrying a wealthy man. They're so busy making money they don't have time to make babies. "Are you still trying?" Shirlene shrugged as she retied the ribbon in a perfect bow. "Lyle thinks it's God's will. You could adopt, you know." "I know, but maybe Lyle's right. Maybe this West Texas girl's a little too wild to be a good mama." Releasing her breath, she flopped back in the chair, causing her broads to jiggle like Aunt May's jello mold. "Geez, we make a pathetic pair, don't we, Hog? Me, a lonely, childless housewife, and you, a jilted woman." Hope looked around before hissing underneath her breath. "I was not jilted, Shirl." "I don't know what you would call it, Hog. Everyone in this town was there when you agreed to marry Slate, regardless of the fact that he hadn't asked." Hope's jaw tightened. "You know as well as everybody else that Slate proposed to me years ago, and we both know he was never serious." She hesitated and then sent Hope a pointed look. "And if I remember correctly, neither were you." Unable to look back at those prospective green eyes, Hope stared out at the dance floor, where Slate continued to whirl her twin sister around. "I always planned on marrying Slate," Shirlene snorted. "If I had a dime for every one of your plans, Hope, I'd be rich enough to lure Dallas Cowboys away from Jerry Jones. As if you're not already." "True." The contagious smile flashed as Shirlene reached over and picked up a champagne bottle. She filled a cup for each of them before lifting hers. "Here's to wild Texas women. We might be down, but we'll never be out." Finally giving in to a smile, Hope lifted her cup and tapped Shirlene's damn straight. But before she could take a sip, the mare Harley Sutter came chugging up and took the cup from her hand. "No time for drinking, Hope." He handed her the cup, Shirlene, and pulled Hope from the chair. "Not when the entire town wants to dance with her sweetheart." Since Hope had never been able to disappoint her hometown, she rolled her eyes at Shirlene and allowed Harley to pull her out to the dance floor. Unfortunately, the two-step had ended, and the band struck up one of those stupid wedding songs. Though only worked in a room filled with drunks, still she pinned on a smile and tried to act like she enjoyed impersonating a flustered chicken. "Glad to see you happy, Hope," Harley said as he flapped his arms around his belly and more like keg like a six-pack. "You know what they say, home is where the heart is, unless some Disney princess stole it right from out underneath your nose," Hope thought as Harley swung her right over to Sheriff Sam Winslow. "He's right, Hope," Sam said as he flapped. "Hollywood has had our sweetheart long enough, though I bet there ain't going to be real happy to lose such talent. That hemorrhoid commercial you did sure brought tears to my eyes. It had to be real hard to get such a look of complete discomfort." He swung her around. "But you sure nailed it, Hog. Myra raced out and got a tube that very night." "A tube of what?" Rachel Dean stepped up. Hemorrhoid cream," Sam answered before stepping away. "Oh, honey," Rachel Dean clapped her man's hands and then jerked Hope into a swing that almost snapped her spinal column. "I got hemorrhoids when I was pregnant, and I'm telling you right now there ain't no cream or God's green earth that will help that hellish burning." Not wanting to talk about hemorrhoids or pregnancy, Hope gladly turned to her next partner, although her pinned-on smile slipped when she stared up to a pair of dreamy hazel eyes. Then she struggled to regain her composure. The silly song ended and a waltz began. "Could I have this dance, Miss Scroggs?" Slate asked. The word "no" hovered on her lips, but of course she couldn't say no, not unless she wanted to know exactly how hurt she was. "Only if you do keep your big boots off my toes, cowboy." "I'll do my best." Slate flashed a sexy grin that would make women melt. Hope didn't melt, but she felt thoroughly singed, or maybe just annoyed that she just didn't get to claim the body that went with that smile. His best turned out to be the worse than Hope remembered. Only 2 steps and his toes were smashing hers underneath his boots. And she forced to do what she always done when they danced, take the lead. Except now he didn't follow as well as he used to. "Listen, Hope," he said, "I realized this had been hard on you. You come back to Bramble expecting, well, I don't know exactly what you were expecting, but it sure couldn't have been a twin sister you didn't know you had, or a wedding that had been planned without you knowing. Our wedding, no less." Slate chuckled. "Crazy townsfolk." She looked away. "Yeah, crazy. But you want to know what's even crazier," he continued. "All it took was one look from Faith, or maybe a kiss that knocked my hat off, and I was a goner. A complete goner." Hope wished that she was a goner, gone from this man and this room, this town. The pits of hell opened up at that very moment and swallowed her up. It could be a relief, but that didn't happen. So all she could do was guard her toes and try not to act like she gave a darn about her wedding and the disintegrated just like her dreams of becoming a movie star. She was thankful when the slow ballad ended and Slate pulled away as Harley bellowed, "Come on, you unhitched folks, it's time for the garter and bouquet toss." Hope tried to make a run for it. Let's see. Where I lost my place again. Hope tried to make a run for it, but the town pushed her forward, swarming around a chair that had been set up in the middle of the dance floor, a chair where her sister sat and waited for Slate to dip that head of his sun-kissed hair, and using nothing but his teeth, tug that light blue garter down a leg identical to her own. "I love a man who knows what to do with his mouth," Rachel Dean yelled. Whooping and hollering broke out loud enough to shake the sturdy stone building. With the town's attention focused elsewhere, Hope attempted to inch her way towards the door, but she should have known better, especially when she had such an ornery best friend. "Now don't be getting any ideas about leaving, Hog." Shirlene positioned her body between Hope and the exit. "Not when everybody expects you to get up there and catch that ugly silk bouquet of flowers Darla hot glued together." "Ugly?" Darla clasped her hands to her chest. "Well, I'll have you know I paid a pretty penny for those over at nothing over $1. "Of course you did, honey." Shirlene sent her a wink. "If anybody can stretch $1, it's you." The words seemed to pacify Darla as she smiled brightly as Shirlene slipped an arm around Hope and leaned forward to speak in her ear. "Now, if I know you want to go home and wallow in self-pity. But we both know this town isn't going to let you get away with that, so just bite the bullet, get in there, and do me proud." She gave her a loving pat on the back before she shoved her in the middle of the dance floor, and by this time Hope caught her balance, and Shirlene had disappeared into the crowd of single ladies. It was a pathetic group. There was Twyla, who had already been married 3 times, Rachel Dean, who came close with 2, the librarian, Miss Murphy, who was smart enough to avoid marriage altogether, but still had to endure the crazy ritual every time someone had a wedding, Hope's 2 younger sisters, Jenna J. and Tessa, and a couple other giggling girls. Her twin sister stood to the side of her, holding her nothing over a buck bouquet and grinning like the seven dwarfs were all coming over the castle for dinner. Of course, who wouldn't grin if she had wrangled the best looking man this side of the Mississippi, while her sister was still forced to fight for the leftovers? Well, Hope wasn't fighting. She was all fought out. She didn't care if Darla hot glued flowers were made out of solid gold. She wasn't going to lift one finger for them. Not one finger. Ready? Faith looked directly at her. Hope experienced the same strange phenomenon that she always experienced when her twin sister looked at her. It was like looking into a mirror, not externally, but internally. Everything Hope felt was reflected right back at her. Hurt, confusion, anger, self-pity, it was all there in her familiar blue eyes. Fortunately, Faith broke the connection by turning around and giving Hope something else to think about, like how to avoid a large bouquet of silk flowers that Faith launched right over her shoulder. Hope figured it wouldn't be hard, not when Twyla had perfected that wide receiver dive that won her numerous silk flower trophies and a bunch of good-for-nothing husbands. But the bouquet sailed through the air. Twyla didn't move one undeployed muscle toward it, nor did Rachel or Miss Murphy or even Jenna J. or Tessa, or any of those giggling girls. Instead, everyone just watched as the purple batch of flowers tumbled over the end straight towards Hope. She took a step back, then another. But the bouquet just kept coming. If it hadn't been heading for her like a heat-seeking missile, she might have turned and run. But she didn't. She wasn't about to take her eyes off of Darla's creation, not when Hope's own maid of honor bouquet was good solid 5 pounds of hardened hot glue. So instead, Hope widened her stance and prepared to deflect the floral grenade with an arm. It would have worked, too, if her watch hadn't snagged the yard of half-tulle netting surrounding the flowers, something Hope didn't realize until she lowered her arm and felt the dead weight. Like a preschooler doing the hokey-pokey, she shook her arm to try to get it loose, but the bouquet refused to budge, and after only a few seconds of crazy waving, she realized it was no use and let her arms drop. She expected a wave of cat calls and whistles, but what she got was a complete silence. Confused, she glanced up to find the entire roomful of people staring at her, except not at her. Few things could pull the town's attention away from their sweetheart, yet something had. Something that had nothing to do with ugly silk flowers or 5 pounds of hot glue. Something that was so intriguing the town had completely forgotten that Hope Scruggs existed. A chill of foreboding tiptoed up Hope's spine, and her stomach tightened and gave a little heave as she slowly turned around. Just that quickly things went from bad to worse. A man stood in the open doorway with his shoulder propped against the frame as if he didn't care in the world, and if he didn't stick out like a sore thumb from other men who were dressed in their Sunday best of western pants, heavily starched shirts, and polished cowboy boots. This man looked like a desperado who'd come off a long, hard ride. Road dust covered his round-toed black biker boots, and with those thick soles and silver buckles partially hidden by his tattered hem of his jeans, so worn that they had molded to all the right nooks and crannies, defining those hard thighs and lean valleys. A basic black T-shirt was tucked into his jeans, stretching over miles of the muscle hugging in the hard knots of his biceps. But although he had a body that could tempt a Bible banger on a Sunday, it was his face that held Hope's attention. A face made up of tanned skin, hard angles, and a thin layer of black stubble. Come to think of it, everything about the man was black, including his heart. Everything but those steel-gray eyes that scanned the room as if looking for something or someone. Hope ducked behind Kenny, Jean, and stealthily peeked over his shoulder, watching as the man pushed away from the door jamb and weaved around the tables, unfortunately in the opposite direction. The smart thing to do would be to slip out the door before he saw her, and she might have just done that if his fine butt and those buttery jeans had not distracted her. It was a shame, a darn shame. That man was such a mean, ornery lowlife. A mean, ornery lowlife who stopped right in front of Faith. It made no sense, but he stood there, those unemotional eyes drilling her sister with intensity that caused the Disney smile to droop. "It seems I missed the wedding," he stated in a deep, sulky voice that didn't match his rough exterior, "so I guess the only thing left to do," those big biker hands slipped around Faith's waist, "is kiss the bride." Then before Hope's mouth could finish dropping open, he lowered his head, laid one on her twin sister, not a gentlemanly peck, but a deep, wet lip lock that left the little doubt that tongue was involved. It was the tongue that forced Hope's true nature to return from the depressed, self-pitying cocoon it had been hiding in since learning that Slate was in love with Faith. That lying, conniving tongue caused Hope's long-wilded emotions to spew forth in a geyser of liberating anger. "Colt Lomax!" Hope screamed, long enough to shake the tiles of the ceiling as she shoved her way through the crowd. Get your filthy hands off my sister." Colt Lomax has spent most of his life in Bramble, Texas, angry. Oh, angry over his daddy dying at such a young age, angry that his mama couldn't pull herself together after his daddy's death and take proper care of him and his little sister, angry that he had to grow up in a small town filled with small-minded people who only saw what they wanted to see. But it wasn't anger Colt felt when he pulled away from the kiss. It was confusion. Confusion over the fact that the woman he just thought he had kissed was the same woman racing towards him with the murder in her big blue eyes. And since that look was a familiar one, Colt figured he made a mistake. But before he could figure that extent of his mistake, Slate Calhoun's fist connected with his face and rang his bell. Now, he had always accepted responsibility for his mistakes along with fitting punishment, but one punch was fitting. Two was overkill. So when the next punch came at him, Colt was ready and easily deflected it with a raised arm. Unfortunately, this fist belonged to Hope. Her skinny forearm thumped against him so hard that he worried about fractured bones, but that concern was replaced with another when the bouquet of flowers that hung from the wrist clipped in her chin dropped her to his feet in a crumble of shiny purple material and a pile of glossy brown hair. If fear hadn't gotten in his way, Colt might have seen the humor in having Hope's scrub spill over his boots like a religious fanatic at the foot of an idol, but there was no humor in the pale arm flung over the gray speckled tile floor, no humor in that satin-covered chest that didn't appear to rise and fall. "Gee, Colt," Kenny Jean said, "I didn't like Hope. I knew you didn't like Hope, but you didn't have to haul off and hit her." Stunned and slightly punch-drunk, it took Colt a moment to react, a moment that found Hope and Slate in Calhoun's arms. "Just put her down here, Slate." Jenna, Hope's mama, directed Slate over to a table where a couple of women scurried to clear off the plastic plates and utensils and a ceramic pig that almost brought a smile to Colt's face. But it was hard to smile when you had just knocked out by a woman, and not just any woman, but the sweetheart of Bramble, Texas. He was surprised that they hadn't tarred and feathered him by now, probably because they were too concerned over their little Hope, although not as concerned as Colt. Slate carefully laid Hope down as Jenna soaked up a napkin in water and ran it over her face. The rest of the town moved in to huddle around her. It only took a few well-placed elbows for Colt to make his way to the front of the pack. "She ain't dead, is she?" Kenny tipped his black cowboy hat up on his forehead and leaned in closer as the knot on Colt's stomach tightened. "Course she ain't dead," Rachel Dean said, although her man-sized hands were clutched to her chest in a very unconvincing way. With her purple gown spread out around her and the bouquet resting on her chest, Hope looked like a fairy tale princess, not the one who slept, but the one who had been poisoned. Miles of the rich dark hair framed a deathly lined face, and a face that was familiar to Colt as his own from her high forehead to the stubborn chin, a chin that now had a nasty-looking red knot. What the hell was the matter with these country bumpkins anyway? Someone should be calling 911 or running to fetch Doc Mathers, not standing around like a bunch of hicks straight off the farm. But before Colt could voice his thoughts, Slate leaned over, presenting a picture all too familiar. Now the fairy tale was complete. Slate and Hope, star quarterback and homecoming queen. Colt had waited for the Prince of Bramble to kiss the princess awake, but instead Slate tapped her cheek in a way that didn't look like all that princely. "Come on now, Hog, wake up." The nickname sent a stab of anger through Colt, but it was nothing compared to what he felt as all those dark lashes fluttered open and a dreamy smile slid across those rosy lips. "Slate," Hope breathed, what could only be described as an awe of relief. Slate grinned down at her. "What, did Hollywood turn you into a cityfied wimp? You sure used to take a punch a lot better than that, Hog." Just quickly her smile slipped and her gaze went around the room until it hit Colt square in the gut. Those baby blues narrows, and in one of fluid motion she swung her legs over the edge of the table and hopped down onto her scuffed brown cowboy boots. "You hit me," Hope yelled in a voice that made his head ache. She swung at him, but he caught her wrist, the bouquet of heavy ast flowers cracking into his forearm with a painful thud. Her other fist flew at the opposite side of his face, and he grabbed that too. With no hands left, her little cowboy boots started in attacking his shins with a vengeance. It hurt like hell, but he wasn't about to let go of her hands, not in a room filled with heavy ceramic pigs. Of course, he didn't think about her knees until one came too close for comfort. Colt turned to the side to avoid to have his voice changed 3 octaves and tried to figure out some way to contain the wildcat. Luckily, Hope's daddy, Burl, stepped up and placed a beefy arm around her waist, gently pulling her away. "Settle down there, little girl. Your mama's worried you're going to get yourself hurt." Hurt herself? Colt was the one with a multitude of bruises. Not that anyone seemed to care. All eyes were on Hope, who still ranted and raved like a lunatic. "You low-down son of a snake! You smelly piece of Texas roadkill! You disreputable, good-for-nothing motorcycle bum!" It wasn't anything that he hadn't heard coming out of Hope's mouth before, so he settled in and waited for her to run out of steam. He knew from experience that it could take a while, but the rant was cut short when his baby sister pushed her way through the crowd. "What in the world is going on here?" Shirlene sashayed over to Hope in her high heels, pretty gold dress. Next to Hope, she looked like an Amazon, a golden-haired Amazon with laughing green eyes. It had only been 6 months since he had seen Shirlene, had met in Odessa to visit with her mama. Still, it looked as if the baby sister had grown even more beautiful since then. As Shirlene set down the plastic cup of what looked like straight tequila, her gaze drifted down from the bouquet dangled from Hope's arm. "Okay, so I see you caught the bouquet, but that is not a reason to throw a temper tantrum. I mean, it's not like you're going to become Twyla." "And just what is supposed to mean, Shirlene Dalton?" Twyla huffed. Shirlene lifted an eyebrow at the woman in too tight dress and piles of makeup. "Do I need to explain it, honey?" She turned back to Hope. "But it's only a bouquet, Hog. It's not like anyone's forcing you to get married." "She ain't mad about the bouquet, Shirlene," Rachel Dean enlightened her. "She's mad because Colt knocked her out." "Colt?" Shirlene turned and her gaze snagged him. Colt! In 2 steps she was in his arms, and he had to say that it was nice to finally receive a warm welcome. "What are you doing here, honey?" she asked. She pulled back, all smiles, until her gaze settled on his lip. Then her face looked like a mama tiger who had just discovered their cub abused. "Who hit you?" He tested his lip with his tongue, and tasting blood, she used the back of her hand to wipe it off. "It's not a big deal. I made a mistake is all. More like numerous mistakes. The biggest mistake was coming back to Bramble in the first place," Colt thought. "What kind of mistake?" Shirlene's eyes clouded with confusion. Colt knew exactly how she felt. He wasn't quite sure what he walked into. "I think I can explain." Harley Sutter stepped up. Harley was the mayor, judge, lawyer of Bramble, and as such he always taken it upon himself to be the town mouthpiece, long-winded mouthpiece who could talk for days, which is why Colt leaned back against the edge of the table and crossed his arms. "It appears to me that this is a simple case of mistaken identity. Colt here." Harley paused and gave Colt the disapproving look he always gave him. "I thought you were in prison, son." Colt tossed back his signature go-to-hell look. "I got out on good behavior." Harley's eyes narrowed suspiciously before he rested his hands on his stomach that seen too many nights of chicken fried steak from Josephine's diner, and then continued. Not being as perceptive as the rest of the town, Colt assumed that Faith was Hope. His gaze moved around the room. "Where is our little Faith, anyway?" "Right here." The woman Colt had kissed stepped forward, and his eyes widened. During the hoopla of the last few minutes he convinced himself that between lack of sleep and the hard ride his mind had played a trick on him, but his mind hadn't tricked him at all. The blushing woman who had stared back at him with innocent blue eyes looked identical to Hope, identical except for the short honey-streaked brown hair that curled into around her face. "So you're Shirlene's brother?" Faith said without any twang whatsoever. "Faith, this is my honorary brother, Colt Lomax." Shirlene made the introductions. "Colt, this is Faith Faith Calhoun." His gaze shot over to Hope, and their eyes looked for a brief second before she looked away, but a brief second was all she needed to read the turbulent emotions that swirled around the endless blue eyes. "Well, it's nice to meet you, Colt," Faith said. Since Colt had done a little more than meet her, he rubbed a hand over the back of his neck and stumbled through his mind for a way to apologize for cramming his tongue down her throat. "Nice to meet you, ma'am, and I'm real sorry about all the confusion and all." A tentative smile tipped the corners of her mouth, and she took a few steps closer, so like Hope that if he hadn't already been leaning against the table he might have taken a few steps back. "Apology accepted," she said in a low voice, so soft that he could barely hear her. Colt cocked an eyebrow. She might look like Hope, but she sure didn't act like her. Hope had never accepted an apology from him in her life. Not that he'd ever given her one. those pretty eyes scrunched up. Did you realize that you're bleeding? Before he could do more than that, nod, Faith jerked a couple of napkins off a nearby table, dunked them in a cup. I wish I had my disinfectant wipes, but this will have to do. The touch of the soaked napkin on his cut lip almost sent him straight through the ceiling tiles. Lord, woman! He held a hand to the burning lip. What in the hell's on that? Her blue eyes widened. She glanced down at the napkin. Water. I think that would be Rachel Dean's Everclear, Faith, Slate said as he took the napkin from her hand. But don't you worry, darling. 100 proof liquor just works like your disinfectant wipes. His humor-filled eyes tracked over to Colt just with a little bit more sting. Faith shook her head and the curls danced. I'm so sorry. I thought... Is someone going to tell me who hit my brother? Shirlene cut in. I did, Slate stated. Shirlene's eyes narrowed on him before she could let him have it. Rachel Dean jumped in. Only because he was kissing Faith. More like devouring, Twyla said. I got all hot and bothered just watching. Course, after years in prison, a man must be pretty starved for the female attention. Something that sounded an awful lot like a growl came through Slate's teeth, and Colt braced himself for another go-round, although at this point he would have welcomed a good fight, but his sister held up in her hand before Slate could throw the next punch. So let me get this straight. Colt mistook Faith for Hope and laid one on her? Shirlene asked without waiting for a reply. She started laughing like a crazy woman. Always willing to laugh at a good joke, the town joined in, and as annoyed as Colt was with the entire prison comment, he had to smile. The only person not laughing was Hope, whose eyes had turned cold as the icy North Dakota fishing pond in the dead of winter, and all that frigid hate was directed slowly at him before she whirled and stomped off. As usual, once Hope was gone, the townspeople didn't quite know what to do with themselves. Women looked at each other, while men stuffed their hands in their pockets and studied the tiled floor. More than a few moments of uncomfortable passed before Harley took the bull by the horns. Well, what are we all standing around for? He nodded at Bud Mueller, who had always played the mean fiddle, and Bud hurried off, followed by the other band members. Are we going to let little fight stop us from celebrating Faith and Slate's wedding? Of course, a hell no's rang up, and just quickly people dispersed, leaving Colt alone with his sister. Lord, Shirlene shook her head. She retrieved a cup and sat down at the table. I leave for 2 seconds and miss all the good stuff. Believe me, it wasn't all that exciting. He sat down and grabbed a napkin and held it to his mouth. I guess after spending the last few years in prison, Bramble must seem awfully dull. Shirlene shot up a quirky little grin before she offered him her cup. When he shook his head, she pulled it back and took a deep drink. I bet folks would be surprised to know you're such a teetotaler. Of course, folks would be surprised at a lot of things. He sent her a warning look. Things I just soon as you kept yourself. She ran a finger across her lips. Sealed tight as a drum. Colt didn't need the reassurance. Shirlene could keep a secret, which was a good thing, given their childhood. Cradling the cup between her hands, she rested her elbows on the table. So what brings you back to Bramble, big brother? I missed my little sister. She snorted. I believe you, if it hadn't been 8 years since you came back. You got me. Colt winked at her before stretching the truth a little. I'm on my way to Austin to deliver a bike and needed a bed for a night. Even though she was good at keeping secrets, there were still some things that she didn't need to know. She sat up, splashing the tequila on the gold satin of her dress. 1 night? You're only staying 1 night? He hadn't even planned on staying that long. In fact, he hadn't planned on coming at all. 1 second he was talking about a bike delivery, and the next thing he knew, he was passing by the Welcome to Bramble sign on the same bike that he should have been heading to Austin in a covered trailer. Hope is right, Shirlene huffed as she set down the cup and flopped back in the chair. You are a low-down motorcycle bum, Colt Lomax. The least you could do is stay a couple nights and keep your sister company. Lyle working a lot? Too much. Colt scowled. As much as he liked Shirlene's husband, the 25-year age difference was still hard for him to swallow, especially when his sister didn't look all that happy. Of course, to help with that, all he needed to do was stick around for a few days. Unfortunately, Colt had his own demons to deal with, and most of them resided right there in Bramble. I'll tell you what, he leaned on his arms. How about if you come to Austin with me for a few days? On the back of your chopper? He lifted one eyebrow. I was thinking more of you meeting me there. Sort of like you meet me in other places. You get there 3 days and then you leave 3 days early. No thanks. Besides, I don't want to go to Austin. I want you to stay right here with me in Bramble and do all the fun things we used to do as kids. Fun things? Colt couldn't think of one fun thing he'd done as a kid. Still not wanting to burst his sister's bubble, he held his tongue and let her continue. It'll be just like old times, especially with Hope back in town, except now with Faith here, it'll be a double the fun. You're going to love Faith. She's Hope, but nice. Colt laughed. I gathered so. So who is she? Hope's twin sister, who Jenny gave away at birth. The news surprised Colt, not the twin part, that was obvious, but the giving away it part. Jenna Scroggs had always been the perfect mother, the kind who would bake cookies and played hide-and-go-seek and read books and bandaged scraped knees, the kind who was complete opposite of Colt and Shirlene's inattentive mother. As if reading his thoughts, Shirlene nodded. I know it was hard for me to believe, too, but I think people forget that she was only 15 when she had hope and faith, and she and Burl were not married or even out of high school. And you remember how hard it was for them back then. They were in the same boat as we were. Not quite. Their boat had sailed, while he and Shirlene had remained behind. So how did Hope take the news that she had a twin, he asked. Not well, especially when Slate ended up falling for Faith. His gaze shifted to the dance floor where the twins where the half the town was waltzing in a circle around the happy couple. While the sight gave him a certain satisfaction that justice had been served, a part of him almost felt betrayed. In a life where he had learned to count on nothing, Slate marrying Hope had been one of the few things he counted on, which didn't explain his initial anger or the kiss. But years ago, Colt had given up trying to explain his behavior where Hope was concerned. Like Bramble, she brought out the worst in him. Even knowing this, he still couldn't stop himself from scanning the crowd as he talked with Shirlene. Although the windy speech Harley had made before the newlyweds headed out the door, he continued looking for her long after the drunks sobered up. Ceramic pigs were boxed away, and the plastic dishes were rolled inside the ugly purple tablecloths and tossed into the trash. Funny, but Colt hadn't taken Hope for the type to turn tail and run. But that's exactly what it looked like she had done. And maybe she had had the right idea. Maybe the best thing for him to do would be hop on that motorbike and get the hell out of Dodge. He didn't know why he stopped here, but nothing good would come of it. Bramble was a part of his past, and he needed to keep it that way. Shirlene would be upset, but he would make it up to her by spending the holidays with her anywhere but Bramble. Outside, he found the night had grown chilly. It would be a cold ride to Austin. But he didn't mind. While most people found comfort in a cozy home or out of the elements, Colt preferred the open road. No ties or responsibility, just miles of blacktop and freedom. Parked up on the sidewalk right beneath the town hall's flagpole, right next to the dedication plaques at the custom chopper he'd been working on for the last few months. It was a slick machine with a hot custom paint job, chrome exhaust and wheels that gleamed in the light from the overhead streetlight like a high-polished mirror. It wasn't as fancy as some, but Colt had never gone for show as much as go. This baby had a 124 cubic inch motor and 6-speed transmission. Just hearing it rev made Colt proud as heck. After slipping on his leather jacket, he started up the bike and circled around the courtyard of the town hall. The loud, unbaffled engine had people stepping out the doors to investigate. His sister was one of them. When Shirlene saw him, she didn't look surprised. Obviously, she knew him too well. Remember, I love you, big brother, she yelled over the throbbing noise. He might have paid more attention to the devious gleam in his sister's eyes if the woman in purple satin hadn't caught his attention. Hope stood next to the big maple tree, her dress crumpled and her hair limp. In the shade of the tree, he couldn't see her eyes, but he didn't need to. Her arrogant stance said it all. The unyielding strength of such a little bit of sass made him smile even after her lifelong beau had chosen somebody else. Hope would not be defeated. He admired that about her. Would always admire it. He touched a hand to his forehead in a salute to both of the women who had made such an impression on his life, then twisted the throttle and shot off the curb, the thick 240 mm back tire bouncing down to the asphalt. Unfortunately, that was as far as he got before Sheriff Winslow's patrol car came barreling down around the corner with the lights flashing and the siren blaring to cut him off. Okay. I'm going to try and take you to page, what is that one with the yellow paper clip? 400, and then we'll take a break so I can do the laundry, come back, and we're going to hope to finish this book tonight. So we're at page 390 right now. Colt Lomax, just the name made her want to scream out a very nasty cuss word. She glared at the light spilling out from the small barred windows. Hold on a second. Why couldn't Shirlene just let her brother stop for a quick visit? Why did she have to have him arrested? The man was ornerier than a cornered jaguar, and prodding him only made him worse. something Hope knew from his experience. No, the best thing to do for a caged wild animal was to set it free. Hope glanced around, then quickly headed down the path that led to a double glass door of the jail. She didn't expect them to be locked, and she wasn't disappointed. No one in Bramble locked anything, probably because there wasn't anything in Bramble worth stealing. Hurrying through the dark reception area, he made a quick stop in the Sheriff Winlow's office and then headed down the dark hallway to the only jail cell. Like any good Christian woman of Bramble, Hope knew the way. More than once she'd come with her mama to deliver Bibles to the poor lost souls who found themselves behind bars. Not that Bramble had a lot of criminals. Most of the Bibles had gone to Elmer Tate, who slept it off in jail every time he got drunk rather than go home to his wife, who had a mean right hook. Despite his love of Jack Daniels, Elmer was a nice man who would always drop the Bibles back at the First Baptist so the women could redistribute them. Being the town's troublemaker, Colt had gotten his fair share of Bibles too, though Lord only knew why he done with them. At the end of the hallway, Hope pushed through another unlocked door and into the room that housed the jail, but how anyone could call it was beyond her, except for the bars. The cell looked like a country bed and breakfast. Up against one wall was a big brass bed with fluffy down pillows, a wedding ring quilt, and crisp flowered sheets that matched the curtains on the windows. The white porcelain toilet was sparkling clean and had an air freshener on the back, and a fuzzy blue cover on the lid. The sink had a Dixie cup dispenser and a small mirror hanging above it, a mirror Colt that was using as he cleaned the blood from his lip. The door clicked shut behind her, and he turned, and for a split second Hope had the urge to run for her life. No wonder the folks of Bramble thought that he'd been in prison. The man looked like he belonged behind bars, an unscrupulous outlaw who spent his days robbing trains and his nights stealing the hearts of loose women. Wind-tousled black hair almost fell to his shoulders, and the stubble on his square jaw looked even thicker than it had a few hours earlier. Those steely gray eyes stared back at her, the whites bloodshot from booze or lack of sleep, or possibly both. Suddenly she didn't feel cold anymore. "Delivering Bibles, sweetheart?" The dark slashes of his eyebrows lifted. The sarcasm in his deep, smooth voice snapped her out of the outlaw fantasy and back to the loser reality. As if reading the Bible would do your black soul any good, she pushed away from the door. "I'm here to get you out." "A jailbreak? Funny, but I thought that you were the reason I was here in the first place. I mean, Colt Lomax beat up little sweet Hope Sproggs." "Don't blame me, Lomax. I wasn't the one who got Sam after you. Not that you didn't deserve it after hitting me." She felt for only a second of remorse over that lie. She was well aware of what had hit her, but she wasn't about to let Colt get off so easily. Not when he had hurt her plenty in his lifetime. "A jailbreak, huh?" He took a few steps closer to the bars, and it was challenging for her to keep from taking a step back. "So what's your plan? Dynamite, a bulldozer, a file pulled from those silken locks?" "I was thinking more of a key." She held up the heavy ring key. One corner of his mouth fitted with a smile. "A key? What an ingenious plan." Ignoring his sarcasm, she walked over to the lock and considering trying several keys. It was a daunting task, considering that there had to be enough keys there for every unlocked door in Bramble, so many that she had trouble remembering which ones she tried, especially with Colt standing there watching. "You're not kidding, are you?" She glanced up, a pair of curious gray eyes. "I realize that you skipped school more than you attended, but does it look like I'm kidding?" Those eyes narrowed. "So what's in it for you?" "What else? I get you out of my hair." So quickly that she couldn't avoid it, he reached over through the bars and snagged a lock of her hair that fallen over her shoulder in that low ponytail. "I guess a man could get lost in this." He rubbed his fingers in her hair. The sight made her stomach do a crazy flip before jerking her hair back, leaving a few strands entwined in his rough biker fingers. "Stop screwing around." "But I like screwing around." Those dark brown eyes lifted. "Remember?" Her face flushed hot. "Do you always have to be such a smart ass?" "Weren't those our roles in high school?" He pointed a finger at her. "Homecoming queen." He touched his chest. "Smart ass?" "Loser is more like it." She went back to the keys, but damned if she hadn't lost her place again. Luckily, Colt had always been easily bored. After only a few minutes, he walked over to the bed, where he stretched out on Granny Lou's quilt, propped his hands behind his head. It was hard to take his eyes off a mile of muscle that ripped that black cotton shirt and soft jeans. "So are you cold?" At his words, the keys slipped through her fingers and clinked at the floor as her gaze flashed back to his face. "What?" His head turned toward her, and those gray eyes slithered down her chest. Cold. She glanced down to see what he was referencing, and then back at him. You are a sick pervert, Colt Lomax. He shrugged. I only takes what's offered. Not wanting him to think that she offered anything, she tugged her ponytail holder and adjusted it accordingly. The hair should have been a dead giveaway, he stated. She glanced over at him. He had rolled to his side and then propped his head up over his hand. That the mistake I made with your sister. I should have known you would have never cut your hair. Thankful to be off the subject of what was bothering her, Hope shrugged as she picked up the ring key and tried another key. I thought about it once. I even went to a salon in L.A. with the intention of whacking it all off. What happened? I chickened out. There was a long pause before he spoke. I'm glad. Her gaze shot over to him. She might have taken it as a compliment if she hadn't known better. This coming from the man who used to refer to my hair as a matted possum pelt? He flashed her a full-fledged smile, since he wasn't something he often did. The blinding radiance took her by surprise. And what do you think a skin possum would look any better? With her insides bulging, she went on the offensive. As if I care what a low-life motorcycle bum thinks. Why don't you get a job, Lomax, and quit being a blight on society? Because I believe the fewer the responsibilities, the freer the man. And you are about being the freest man I know, she said, to continue to try the keys. Of course, you wouldn't be so free if you didn't have Lyle Dalton's money to spend. Is that what you think I get my money? She glanced up at him. Isn't it? Seconds ticked by as he stared at her. Finally, he relaxed back against the pillow and rested his hands over his chest. You found me out, honey. Luckily, Lyle doesn't seem to care. The truth shouldn't have bothered her, but it did. But just another reason she needed to get him out of town as quickly as possible. Thankfully, that key worked. Twisting the lock, she pulled back the barred door. Come on, we don't have much time. She pulled the key out of the lock and moved over to the outer door. Regardless of the wedding, the churchgoers get up bright and early on Sunday, but since you haven't never attended church, you probably don't know that. I go to church. Hope turned to find him standing close behind her. His hand braced against the door, and it just cracked open. It was one thing to have a row of bars separating them from all that testosterone-pumped maleness, and another to have it inches from her nose. Startled, she dropped the keys, and they slid out into the hallway. I call it the Church of Our Lady of the Highway. Colt released the heavy door and clicked closed as he tipped up her chin. You should put some ice on that. It would have helped with the swelling. I did, she breathed, her voice betraying her quiver insides. By the looks of it, not long enough. He shook his head and gently brushed his thumb over the bump. You never did have a lack of patience. It took a second for Hope to find her voice. Which is exactly why I want you out of this town as quickly as possible. Colt leaned down and his cheek brushed against hers, the sight of the prickly heat. Now why is that, I wonder? His breath fell soft and warm against her ear, and everything inside her seemed to still in anticipation of what he would do next. Except he didn't do anything. He didn't have to. Just his mere presence was enough to make her head fill with all those thoughts that she had no business being there. Naughty thoughts that involved the rugged outlaw in front of her and that soft mattress behind him. She took a deep, steadying breath, but it was a mistake. While most guys in town doused themselves in whatever country singer-endorsed cologne was possible at the time, Colt always smelled like soap and detergent beneath a layer of grease and gasoline. A powerful, strong mixture that never failed to make Hope light-headed. Although now the grease and gasoline weren't as strong as another scent, a raw masculinity lacking in his youth. It was the scent that drew her like a moth to a porch light on a hot summer night. But refusing to get the wings singed, she slipped beneath his arm and stepped around him in an attempt to slow her heart rate. She moved over to a sink and washed her hands. Still avoiding my touch, Hog? He asked from behind her. At all costs. She tried to keep her voice even, but it was still coming out shaky and a little breathless. And don't call me that. Only my friends call me that. And where in the hell do you think they got it? Confused, Hope turned back to him, but her hands dripping on the water, on the rug in the center of the floor. If it was possible, he looked even more dangerous than he had only moments before. You're lying, she stated with a firmness that she didn't quite feel. Slate made it up. Colt studied her for only a few more seconds before he tipped his head. Of course, Slate. Who else would have come up with such a sweet moniker for his girlfriend? He rested his shoulder on the frame of the barred door. So what does he call Faith? Frog, or maybe just wife? The arrow struck with a reverberating thunk. I'd shut up if I were you, she growled. His eyes widened with innocent. What? Did I hit a sore spot? Is Hope Scroggs a little ticked at her twin sister for stealing her boyfriend? Forgetting about drying her hands, she headed for the door. Unfortunately, his big body blocked it. Get out of my way, she ordered. Colt shook his head. Not till you fess up. There's nothing to fess up to. He crossed his arms over his chest, bringing her attention to the tattoos that covered his arms from the shirt sleeve to the wrist. How about you being so ticked off your head is about ready to explode? You're practically shaken from the suppressed anger, so go ahead, let it out. Scream, rant, rave about how your life has been so ruined because Slate Calhoun, the hero of Bramble, found someone else he liked better. Shut up. Or maybe he didn't find anyone he liked better. Maybe he just got tired of waiting around for you. The only thing I'm going to let you out is how much I hate you. You've always been a burr in my butt, Colt Lomax, and you still are. Hope ducked underneath his arm and would have made it past him if he hadn't grabbed a yank of her hair. Let me go, she yelled, but he had always been a poor listener. He wrapped the strands around his fist and reeled her in. Hope refused to give in that easily, and she stretched out and grabbed one of the bars. Unfortunately, the bar was grabbed onto a connection to the door, and as she tugged it backwards, the door slammed, closed behind them with a loud clang. Her hair released. Did you? Colt words hung in the air until Hope let out a high-pitched squeal. No, she raced over to the bars and jerked them, but they didn't budge an inch, not 1 inch. She searched around for the keys before she remembered where they were, lying on the floor on the other side of the door. She whirled around him to let him have it, but she stopped right in the sight of him pulling his shirt up. It was hard to talk when confronted with a washboard stomach that you could play a spoon on. What are you doing? She squeaked. Going to bed. The shirt inched higher before that snapped out of her sexual haze and jerked it back down. Have you lost your mind? We have to find a way out of here. She looked around the tiny cell for anything to help her escape, but she could find no use for a Dixie dispenser or a pile of Field and Stream magazines or a crocheted toilet paper doll cover. And what infuriated her even more was that he didn't seem all concerned about the situation. Probably because he spent so much time behind those bars, it was more like home to him. He bounced down on the bed, propped his hands beneath his head. Fortunately, his shirt was still on. Since I'm not the one who locked us in here, I don't see how that's my job. No, you were just the idiot who caused me to slam the door in the first place. He shrugged. All right, I'll give you that one. So, how you want me to get us out of here? Forget it. She paced the cell, her slippers flopping. Lord knows I wouldn't want you to hurt yourself. If you say so, honey. He tugged the quilt up, but could you turn out the light before you come to bed? I'm not coming to bed. I'm going to find a way out of here if it kills me. She sent him the most determined look. He must have read it perfectly because he released a long, heavy sigh. Well, hell. In one fluid motion he was off the bed and had the light off and hefted her over his shoulder. Put me down. She kicked and swung at him, but she couldn't do much damage in the 2 strides it took him to get her to bed. He tossed her down on the mattress, and before she could sit up, he bounced her down next to her and clamped her arm around her waist. Now, believe me, honey, when I tell you that I've always found your temper tantrums entertaining, but after riding so close for 20 hours, getting my bell rung, my shins kicked, and tossed into jail, if for no damn good reason, my patience running a little thin, so I think that the smart thing for you to do right now is to be quiet and go to sleep. I'm not going to sleep with you. Then don't sleep. I don't give a damn. You're not getting out of this bed until the sun shines through that damn window up there. She made one more attempt at getting loose, but he only tugged her closer and flung one very hard leg over her thighs. You are the same arrogant jerk you were in high school, she huffed, and you're the same spoiled brat. I'm not spoiled. He stuffed a pillow under his head and with the other arm remained firmly tucked around her waist. I don't know what you'd call it, but you have an entire town doing your bidding. Accepting the fact that she wasn't going anywhere, she relaxed and allowed her arms to flop over the corded muscles of his forearm. Not the entire town. No, I guess you're right, and with that he pressed his face into the matted possum pelt and went to sleep. Hope laid awake, trying to figure out how she had ended up in bed with Colt Lomax again. Now, we're taking a time out so I can go check on the laundry. I will come back, and we're going to do our best to finish this book, and then I'm going to do something I haven't done in a long time. I'm going to, not only wrap presents, which is something I do every holiday, but I'm going to paint my nails. Why? I need some cheering up. So that will do me some good. So stay tuned. Part 2, and hopefully the conclusion of Make Mine a Bad Boy by Katie Lane will be coming up shortly.